I'm a young black man doing all that I can to stand. Oh, but when I look around and I see what's being done to my kind, every day I'm being hurt to disgrace. My people don't want no trouble. We've got enough struggle. I just wanna live. God protect me.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Pastor Jay. Welcome to yet another Tab Talk Tuesday. I believe that something great is happening, that we are creating a level of conversation that is bringing awareness, understanding to what it means to be a Black man in America, how we handle what's going on right now in America, and some answers and some solutions that we're trying to get to make sure that as a people, we are well equipped and well able to walk into the future regarding being a Black man in America. So, with that being said, I am glad to bring in my panel for this evening. Would you help me welcome very quickly Sam Durfee? He is an amazing father, leader. Sam and I have been connected for probably 30 years or more as a member of the TAB. One of my mentors. We also have Charles Fleming, who is one of the pastors here at the church. And then we have who I'll deem, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, really a community activist at this point. Brandon is on with us as well. And we're going to have some good conversation today about fathers. This is really a father-son conversation. This is the Tuesday after Father's Day. And while we celebrated fathers on Sunday, today we're going to talk about the impact of fathers in the community, in the household, and see where things go from there. So let's start the conversation with this particular question. What do you say to our sons and daughters? And Brandon, since you are the newbie, I'm going to throw this to you first. What do you say to our sons and daughters who are, and the future generation who are Black in America? How do we handle being Black in America? What advice would you give to your children in this present culture?
Yeah. First and foremost, I wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to be on here. I appreciate you, Pastor Nelson, Pastor Chuck, and Mr. Durfee. Definitely appreciate the opportunity. And I would say to my children and to other children is to continue to keep your eyes open. Right. I recognize that at certain ages, children are more likely to listen to friends, like when they sort of hit that 13-year-old and above age versus the younger children. Right. And so I'm going through that right now. I'm a father of two. I have a 17-year-old son and a 13-year-old daughter. And as you start to think about the ages and how fathering starts to change at a certain time, you have to change your ways of parenting. And for me, that is recognizing that peer groups are very important and influential in their lives, right? So they're hearing things from their peers, they're hearing things from social media, and they have to navigate all those different stimuli that's coming at them. And so we have to continue to be consistent with our children and let them know that we are there. What they're experiencing right now, even though it seems new, this is something that generations have been struggling with for a very long time. And we can learn from past generations, but at the same time, we're in a new age, and their perspectives are needed in this struggle, and for them to be a part of this. I think one of the worst things we can do is keep them out of this and keep them sheltered away. So it's important to have them by our sides when we discuss these very tough situations.
Good. Sam, what do you think?
Excellent point. I think creating a forum where you can talk to them about the current situations actually starts when they're at that, depending on the age of your children, it starts at that very young age. So I've always taken the approach of whenever there's a conversation or a tough conversation that I have to have with them, engage them and teach, and then review what I've taught, and then reward the behaviors that they exhibit from the teachings. So creating a forum where you can communicate with them. I didn't have to contend with, or compete with Facebook or some of the social media platforms that you all, as younger fathers, have to compete with now. So it was basically all children at a certain age, they believe what mom and dad says, and that's the end all be all. Then as they're exposed to the rest of the world, they go out and they meet Pookie, let me say Pookie, whoever they meet in class, then that becomes the person they know always contending with and competing with that other source of knowledge. But you have to create a forum. And then the engagement piece is making sure that you're not being judgmental and more of a Socratic questioning. Like, what do they think? How do they feel about it? And then you insert kind of where you are.
Good. PC?
For me, it's trying to manage their expectations as they grow older. And what I mean by that is giving them the understanding that they're going to experience some obstacles that aren't necessarily, it's a cultural thing. Like, hey, understand you go to a predominantly Black school because we live in a predominantly Black neighborhood. But as you transition from middle school to high school to college to work or grad school, law school, college, you'll experience a more diverse collective of people. And don't assume that just because people smile in your face and you sit down and eat with them, that they consider you equal. So trying to, and not to make them, not trying to create or not trying to scare them, but trying to set correct barriers or proper barriers as they enter the world. Because Shari experienced racism in law school and she was put off by it, but I experienced it in middle school, so I know how to adjust to it and I know it exists. And I think it was more of a shock for her than it was for me, knowing at such a young age that it's out there.
That makes perfect sense. I do think that we have to set some boundaries. I do think we have to give our kids some parameters, and I do think we have to definitely create a culture where conversation is normal for them, so that if there are any issues that they face, that our kids don't feel like they don't have an advocate or an ear that will work for them with regard to how we manage in what we know as a very, very racially divisive culture. In that same regard, though, one of the things that I think we have to do is thread the needle. So how do you balance giving instructions about being safe, about being careful, about interaction with police officers, interaction with authority figures, interaction with people of other ethnicities, while simultaneously encouraging them to keep the movement progressing in the right direction with regard to culture and the status quo of racism and white privilege and being considered less than? How do you thread the needle? We'll keep the same process going. So we'll go Brandon, Sam, and Chuck. But how do you thread the needle, Brandon, between you need to be safe, but also there is a responsibility on us to a large degree, not all of it, but to a large degree, to help keep the movement going so that it doesn't stop with our generation?
Mm-hmm. That's a tricky question. So we moved from Baltimore in 2016 to a neighborhood called Oak Park in Chicago. And so when I think about your question about culture, I think about socio-demographics. You know, we left a city that was almost 70% African-American, and we're in a neighborhood that is pretty much like maybe 21% African-American. Cultural diversity is pretty abundant. And so I think moving my children here at that age, they sort of experience what a Black community looked like to a more culturally diverse community. And with that said, I think that we pretty much set a foundation of what, Black excellence looks like, but also navigating the rest of the world, right? The rest of the world is not 67. Baltimore is very different than many other cities, right? And very other beyond cities, very different contexts. So how do you navigate knowledge of yourself and valuing yourself as a black person, but also recognize that there's these other cultures out there, right? And some of these cultures may be more privileged, right? So I think what Sam said about having that discussion is very key, right? How do you respect yourself, know your worth, but at the same time know that you're competing against various odds out there for people who do not necessarily value your life, right? And so I think it's important to have those conversations. So I would pretty much impart that.
Okay, Sam.
Yeah, those conversations are critical to have, but you have to, and you hit the nail on the head as far as like making sure that you prepare them for what they're going to deal with. And it's changed. The landscape has changed significantly. If I go back to the 60s and 70s, I didn't know I was a minority until I left the neighborhood and went into, back then it was junior high school, pretty much in high school. But I didn't know I was a minority. And the only thing I saw about racism was on the 6 o'clock news and what was happening down in the South. So from the standpoint of self-pride and who was I, it was determined based on my family dynamic, my neighborhood dynamic, and probably the sports that I played in school and in the neighborhood. So going outside of the neighborhood kind of opened up a whole nother set of boundaries and rules. My first encounter with racism was driving down south with my parents, and we had to stop and go to the bathroom, and we came into a diner, and it said black or colored only. One section which you could use the bathroom, and those bathrooms were pretty much in bad shape. And I was like, wow, I saw this on TV, but to actually see it, and then to see people looking at me strange with a sense of fear in their eye because I was black. So I brought that back home. And when I did, I went through the busing thing back in the 70s and got bused to an all-white school. And that was really kind of what I'd say gave me kind of a baptism into racism and what it was like. What I found was what a lot of it was just fear-based because people didn't know. So diversity from the standpoint of I'm different from you, and being able to lower that water level to expose myself and be more transparent helped in some cases. And in some cases, I made the choice to fight. I was a aggressive kid, and when you said something to me and it didn't set well with me, I went to these, and that's what I used to navigate through high school. Didn't get a lot of work done, but I won a lot of fights. From the standpoint of growing up, I realized that I could not subject my kids to that type of defense mechanism, and they had to be more intellectual with how they were dealing. So again, teaching them self-worth and their own individual capability which would move them forward, and that would be the thing that they would be able to build on foundationally is who they were and that self-pride and who they were, and then also having a strong spiritual base, whose they were, and recognizing that you're not who you are because of the color of your skin, and it's the quality of who you are that goes forward. So I had a lot of friends that, and I still have friends and associates that are white. For me, I love people. I like to learn from people. And what I found was that removes that fear. Now, within the black community, there are degrees of association. There's a social dynamic that exists with us. So I think when you start talking about the inner city, and we talked a little bit before about growing up in certain areas of the city that are all black or kind of mixed, there has to be an approach, and that approach has to be, you have to be self-confident enough to lower the water level so that you can learn from others and you can engage others.
So I second Sam's points and Brandon's points. One thing I have been doing as a father with all girls is having conversations, continuing to encourage them, understanding that one, they're Black, but also they're females. So they can do anything that they see any boy in school do. They can do anything that they see any girl in school do, but it comes with some input. You have to put some skin in the game. You can't be on TikTok if you want to be at the top of your class. You can go on TikTok, but also do your math work. With school just being out here in Maryland, Sherry and I had a conversation. Hey, let's continue this homeschooling type of environment at home, because they're engaged, they're locked in. It's not as if they're going to the school and then coming back home. You're home. So if you sit down at your desk, even after quote unquote school is out, you still have a mentality of grabbing a book, learning. So continuing to feed and encourage my girls is how we're doing it. But I do understand that you are functioning as moderator, Bishop Jason Nelson. But my question to you is, how are you doing it yourself, man?
I know I was definitely going to answer. I was,
Oh, okay.
you know, of course, as a moderator, I definitely have to give credence to those who are on the panel with me. For me, I've been very, very deliberate about one, helping, especially Jason, because he is still developing some of his who with regard to how he functions in culture. And he goes to a predominantly white school let me go further, a predominantly white school that is more upper crust than not. And so I have to remind him on a regular basis about his behaviors, about his interactions. You are a Black kid. You're a minority in your class. You can't be the class clown. You can be the funniest guy in your class, but you can't be the class clown. You can't be seen as derelict. You can't be seen as lazy, because we're already fighting against a systemic ideology that is very pervasive regarding Black people. So we have that conversation on a regular basis about who he is. You have to do more. You have to come in. Your work has to be done on time. You can't get to class late. Little things that seem insignificant, but in a cultural perspective, carries a lot of weight. So I deal with that particular side of it. Then we have the conversations about interactions with people when you're out. Thank God that media, movies, TV have dealt with how we handle interactions with police officers and things of that nature. So we'll watch a scene and then I'll stop and say, okay, now let's have a discussion about this. Do you understand why these things are necessary? Do you know that you're going to be perceived as a threat just because you're a Black? Nothing else. You can be as benign as everybody else in the room, but because you're Black, there's an implicit threat that they see because of implicit bias. So we've had those conversations, but in the same token, we also have to be vocal. So there was when Colin Kaepernick when he first started kneeling, and now he has been vindicated, thank God. But when he first started kneeling, and there was this big conversation about the flag, you don't dishonor the flag, blah, 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 blah. Not that he was doing anything about the flag. It was about bringing attention to social injustice, police killings, racially motivated killings, things of that nature. But during that time, all of us became more aware about the Star Spangled Banner, right? And the verse that talks about slavery and how that song is exploitative of Black people and slavery. So Jason came home one day and we were talking. So I told him, I said, "Oh, I don't, I'm not standing for the flag. I'm not doing any of that. They can sing it all they want to, but until things start to change, I'm not participating in that." So he went to school and they stood for the flag, and he sat there with his arms crossed like this. So his teacher said, "Jason, this is what we do." He said, "My father told me I don't have to." But and honestly, I was proud because they actually called the house. I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what I said. And he is not bound by your rules regarding a flag that treats you differently than it treats me. And when they understood that, it was cool, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, come on. So I think that's part of what we have to do. We have to let our kids know it's okay to stand up for who you are. It's okay to speak against injustice, but in the same token, you still have to be twice as good. You still have to work twice as hard because of how the system is set up. Now, so Brandon, I think this is a great kickstarter for you. You are an assistant professor in the University of Illinois. Like you bout it. You know what I mean? So this is this. I think this is a great a great question for you. Do you think, as fathers, that we have been progressive enough in our push for racial equality, or have we become anesthetized to what's happening and we've allowed the status quo to be the status quo? Are we doing enough to keep things pushing forward, or have we settled? I think this is a great question to kick off to you.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Well, first of all, you identify me as an academic. That's right. I'm a researcher, right? And as a researcher, the first thing I cannot do unless I have data is generalize what all fathers do, right? Unless we have
Okay.
statistical data that suggests that all fathers are behaving in this way. What I do sense is that from, I guess we could say, Generation Z, that there is a failure on our part holistically as fathers of this generation to push back on the system, right? A system of oppression. And we have a lot of work to do. That said, there are fathers out there that are doing that work, right? Whether, and I don't mean, I know when we first started, we talked about let's not go into dissertations and all that, but I have a little piece that helps my framework a little bit. So let me just go. So when we think about father involvement, right, the literature says that there's pretty much a three-pronged approach to fatherhood involvement, right? First, it starts with access. How accessible are you to your children and to your family as a whole, right? A lot of what we're talking about is engagement, right? How engaged are you with your child, right? So you can be accessible, but your relationship might not be that great, right? Or you might not be performing in an engaging way. You might be there, you might be in the living room, but you're not engaging with your children. The third thing is responsibility, right? So it sort of takes this stepwards approach. How responsible are you? And one of my mentors mentioned that as Black fathers in particular, while we have that framework sort of for all fathers, when it comes to responsible Blackhood fathering, it is we have to be responsible enough to tell our children how to interact with police, right? How to change systems, right? And so we have to go beyond what this foundational framework is and really apply this to our lives. And so at this particular point, I would say our forward movement as Black fathers is to show them how to change society, show them how to change laws, right? And so that said, we have a lot of work to do. So to answer the question very straightforward, I would say we dropped the ball, and it's time for us to pick it up now. So thank you.
Fair enough. Sam?
I think one of the things is to be an example of what you want your kids to become. So you have to, again, academically, you got to make sure that they understand what voting does, what electoral college, what, all of those things, how they impact the Black community. supporting Black businesses, things from a little militant approach. So I'll go back again to the 60s. I had an uncle that was a part of the Black Panther Party, and the Black Panthers were responsible for a lot of things that people didn't give them credit for. So the school lunch programs, breakfast, and feeding the kids, they were all about improving the community and improving what we represented. So making sure that we represent the right things. I don't aspire to some of the things that some of the performers and the rap artists have perpetuated, I'll say through the 80s and 90s, because it was a distortion of kind of who we were in the 60s. I love Public Enemy. Public Enemy lyrics, I listen to them and I'm like, I'm there. Um, NWA had some words that were impact words that got people's attention, but it pointed to what was happening in that community. So I don't think we've dropped the ball as much as we haven't had as a collective a strategic approach to how we make this happen. What do we do? What's the next step after Martin's speech to making it active? What are the steps that go in? And that's what we have to really teach. And that's where we've dropped the ball on, is not going to those next strategic steps. So you have to have an objective. You have to have those goals, and then determine what's the strategies, and then how do we measure those strategies and measure our accomplishments. And that's one of the things I think we haven't done. I'm going to say this, but don't take this the wrong way. But I think our current um, president was one of the best things that happened to us as a people. And let me explain. Because what it did, it woke us up to the reality of where we are and the time that we live. When 44 was elected, we were celebrating and we were moving on up, and George and Wheezy, and we had made it. And we felt that way, and we went to sleep. We took a nap. And current administration made us go, whoa, this took us all the way back to some of those images I saw on television coming from the South. And for me, it was kind of like, wow, that's scary. So it caught us sleeping. So I think this is a wake up call. All the most recent incidents was like, whoa, we're not where we thought we were. Sure, financially, we're doing good and we can move in neighborhoods, and we don't see a lot of redlining that we don't see. And that's the thing that lures us into a sense of complacency, to say like, oh yeah, I make six figures, and I drive this and I can live wherever. But as a collective, how are we viewed as a people? If I'm not running on a field and catching a ball and making X number of millions of dollars, I'm not accepted by certain cultures. And the reality is, even if I am on that field and catching that ball, when I take that helmet off, if that same culture sees me in a social setting, there's a fear that comes along with that when they see me. So I don't think we dropped the ball. I think we kind of missed the strategy and the economic strategies and the things that we need to do to move forward.
Okay.
Um,
Chuck?
Again, I agree with what both gentlemen said. I was just sitting here and I had to write myself a note just to remind me of the experience that I had. But I feel that we have, our generation, I'll say the late or mid 30s to mid to late 40s, we settled and we focused on getting our education. We went to college and it was, let me chase after this American dream. Let me get the nice house, the nice car, move out of the hood where a lot of us were raised, in order to experience a better life. And we did that without considering the lag, or what we're leaving behind, shall I say. Like, we're leaving behind the ability to knock on a door and, hey, Miss Jones needs some sugar. Like, that relationship doesn't happen, well, where I live, because we have homes and I've worked, so I don't have to, quote unquote, live in the hood. But I think a lot of it, for me, is I put blinders on because I graduated. I did everything I was supposed to do. I was raised, hey, you need to work just as hard. You need to work 2 times as harder. And I accepted the fact that me working 2 times harder was just putting me below my counterparts in the workplace, and I accepted it because I was doing better than how I was raised, instead of pushing that extra mile. And
Yeah.
for me, I started my career in ignorance, I'll say, because I assumed, because I got this engineering degree and I'm working in a predominantly white environment and there's not a lot of Black computer engineers out, I did an amazing job until a few, I'll say within the last 5 years, to not tag where I was during this time or during this experience. I had a teammate that I was sitting right next to, and he was not in favor of workplace equality. And he said that he was surprised that I was sitting next to him. And this was, I'll say, within the last 5 years, he was surprised that I was sitting next to him. And he wished that workplace equality wasn't a thing. And his argument for it was, back in the day, if you had a Black engineer working next to you, you know they work double hard and they deserve to be there. Now, because of workplace equality, it's like, well, you're Black, you probably don't meet all of the requirements, but we'll put you in because you're Black. And for me, that opened my eyes to say, oh, I feel like I've made it, but I've really not made it. So I then went back home and began to spend extra time with my girls, and quality time with being a father. But at the same time, what legacy am I leaving behind? Financial literacy, even the bad habits and the bad characteristics that my father passed down to me, just because of the way he fathered me. It was just, if you don't do what I say, it was very militant. And I understand in that space how I was raising my girls at the time, that wasn't good for their future. So I had to pull back. So for me, conversation, I believe a lot of it is what we need to do. We put our blinders on and now they're off, and we need to keep them off and keep pushing.
That's good. See, and I think there is definitely a sect of the white population that believes we're only where we are because the system is designed to benefit, Black people. So we get ahead because of welfare. We got ahead because the government stepped in to make sure that Black people had a chance, without really recognizing that Black people throughout the course of history have been at the forefront of a lot of things that we just didn't get credit for. And I think that has created an issue in how we're being perceived. So with that mindset, and I'm going to throw it right back to you, Chuck, what do you think is the biggest threat to Black fatherhood right now? And Brandon, I'm going to leave you for last on this
one. The biggest threat is, I'll say, the lack of accountability between Black brothers, period, the Black man. Because I had a conversation with Brandon and our other friend Kevon the other day, and Brandon kind of blew the top off of my understanding of fatherhood, because I felt like I was being a good dad, and I was one who was present, but I wasn't 100% engaged with my girls. Hey, is your schoolwork done? Good. You submitted it and you committed your schoolwork? I'm fine. And that's where it stopped. But after talking to Brandon, it's, oh, well, let's talk about what your schoolwork was about. What was your math about? What was your science about? Let's do a project. Let's do a project on the side. Hey, hey Sam, how did you deal with this with raising a daughter with Sierra and just picking his brain on how to be a better father? I don't think we have created an environment of accountability within each other. So I think if we hold each other more accountable, especially in these times now that we're quote unquote all woke, I think we'll build a better community, a better brotherhood, and inevitably we'll get to having a better fatherhood within the Black community.
Sam, that's on you. I'm sorry. I should have
I,
said you're next.
yeah, I think the biggest threat um, to Black fatherhood is we're the biggest threat. Because if we don't set an example, and that goes back to my statement about engagement, teaching, and really review what you've taught and then reward what you've taught. If we're doing something and we get our own agenda, which sometimes, I don't say sometimes, all the time, you're torn between what the kids need and what I need as far as self fulfillment. So, one of the things that you have to dedicate yourself to is the raising of this entity that God has given you to create. You're in charge of creating a person. You're creating a individual. They start out believing everything that you say, you are the end all be all. That responsibility doesn't go away. It evolves and it changes. I think the biggest threat is us feeling like that I've raised my kids, I'm done, and they're not standing on their own, and they're standing on their own 2 feet too soon. Um, what that time limit is different. It's based on the maturity of that child. I'm happy as all get out right now because I don't have children. I have adults that I have adult conversations with. But what I can see is the roots of those conversations are based on something that happened or things that my wife and I did 30 some years ago that kind of created them. Even though they think it's their idea, we can look at it and say, well, wow, we planted that some years ago. So my kids having a perspective on the arts or being financially secure, understanding the economics around do I need to make sure I have solid investments or do I need to go buy a Rolls Royce? I need to make sure my investments are intact before I go looking at a Rolls Royce. And when I get to that point, you'll have a perspective, or they will have a perspective to say, well, do I really need that? So the threat to fatherhood is us taking our hand off of the wheel too soon and making the assumption, assuming that they are without that follow up, without that checkpoint. So when I go back
That's
to those objectives, strategies, and those measures, you have to have those measures in place to make sure that it's time to let go. Eagles basically push their eaglets out of the nest, and the perspective is that I'd rather them die by my hand than some other animal or some other bird of prey kill my eaglet, which diminishes the prowess of the whole eagle family. So it's a matter of having that kind of intensity, being that militant around making sure that these individuals are who you've intended, who God has intended them to be, who you have invested in them, and they're standing. And when I say they're standing, because it's going to come to a point, it's a perpetual bell curve. You start out in this life bald, I'll say bald with no teeth and can't maintain your functions. And when you go out, you're going to go out bald, no teeth, and can't maintain your functions. So you're going to need somebody, but you're going to need somebody in your corner. And I have total trust in my children or my adults as people that they can and they will fulfill, their destinies. Gandhi said, I didn't say it, but he said that your beliefs become your thoughts, and your thoughts become your words become your actions, actions become your habits become your values, and your values become your destiny. So we have to start with those beliefs, implant those beliefs, and follow that process and be confident, but know when to take your hand off and say, okay, they're standing on those 2 feet. So I think that's the biggest threat.
Brandon?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Both Sam and Chuck really put it out there. And I look at what they sort of talk about in terms of an umbrella of personal responsibility, right? Chuck talked a lot about how we need to hold each other accountable, and there needs to be a circle of fathers and brothers that really respect one another, that push each other to make sure that we're doing what we have to do in terms of being a man and being fathers, and that's critically important. And Sam talked a lot about being able to keep your hands on your children, and not keep your hands, but like continue to wrap your arms around them, knowing when to sort of let go and when to continue to support them. And those are all very, very, very important points. But what I also want to put out there is, you asked what the biggest threat is, and the biggest threat continues to be the carceral system, right? And we look at the numbers from back in the 80s to now, and there's been like a 400% increase in incarceration, right? Most of those people who are incarcerated are black males. Many of them are black fathers, right? That has been a problem. The time is now, and I agree with what Sam was saying about, this Trump administration woke us up, right? Now's the time to really flip the system on the head, reimagine what it is to have public safety, right? Do we need law enforcement officers out there threatening our children? Just the other day, my son asked, he's 17, he has his license, his friends have their license. They asked to go to the Indiana Dunes, right? I'm in Illinois. That's about an hour and 15 minutes away. My wife and I thought about it, talked to some of I talked to his friend's father. We have a good network, again, social responsibility. And he was like, no, I can't. I don't think I could do it. I don't think I could do it. And I was like, you know what? His son is Filipino. My son is a black man. And if him, as a Filipino father, feels like he's not ready for his son to go out in the car and drive to Indiana, that put me on pause. What about my black son who's 17 and in the car with, his friends? Should he go? And it's not his fault, right? Who is it? It's law enforcement. I don't want that story to happen again, right? So as dads, our opportunity is now to really continue the protest, but to know what we're asking for, right? There's some policies out there that we know about that are the Justice and Policing Act. It's in Congress right now, right? Are we making phone calls to our members of Congress? Are we holding those people accountable, right? So I always appreciate and respect personal responsibility because it comes back on us, but there's still this system out there that needs to be flipped on its head. And we have to reimagine what law enforcement is, what the carceral system is, and make sure that our children and our neighborhood is not a part of that any longer. So that's sort of my thoughts on that.
Agree.
Excellent. Excellent. I agree wholeheartedly with all of you all's positions on that. I think the just in addendum to that, I don't know that this is the biggest threat, but I think it is a big threat, and that is ignorance. Whether it is willful or whether it is by way of by living in a household vicariously that does not necessarily express what needs to be expressed in that house. So you can grow up literally bereft of certain levels of information, not because it isn't available, but because the system that you grew in didn't cultivate a level of awareness. And I think today, in this modern day society, part of what we have to do is we have to be very okay with transmitting information to the next generation, making sure our sons and our daughters are aware to a very large degree of, one, most importantly, who they are, and in tandem with that, whose they are, like Sam said earlier. But then in an addendum to that is what they can have, the laws, understanding um, knowing the laws gives you an advantage in situations where we get pulled over, because we get pulled over. Black people get pulled over more than white people, especially for no reason. When you know what your laws, you know the law, and when you know what your rights are, I think that is how we help to keep our kids safe. To know that you can actually have a conversation with a police officer, knowing your rights, and that police officer has to adhere to that. And if they don't, there'll be repercussions, we hope, if that police officer does not follow the law. So I think one of the things that we have to do is we have to transmit information to our children to let them know who they are, whose they are, what they can have, and what rights they possess. And I think if we do that, and raise their woke meter, as it were, I think we'll be in much better shape. My daughter is now. She went to the protest last night, the Juneteenth protest last night, and is just now so much more aware of what's happening culturally, with the racial divide and things of that nature. And I have to admit that I am extremely proud of her. And my son is now starting to ask questions. Dad, what does this mean? How do you feel about this? Um, and or just expressing himself regarding those things. And I think the more you have those conversations and you create colloquy within the household, it opens up the opportunity for our kids to be that much more prepared for what happens next. We're just about out of time. I got one more question. Sam, I'm gonna start with you. Go to Brandon, and then Chuck, I'm gonna leave you for last. I know you hate it, but I'm gonna leave you for last. The the last question that I want to ask, Sam, is this: what is the most crucial information that you feel we need to pass to the next generation?
Financial stability. So I think we have to make sure that all of our children understand what what we can do and what we can become financially, and then manage that going forward. Also, the pride in who you are, um, is information that we need to make sure that they understand that totally. I'm not a person that really waits for people to give me opportunity. I usually make my own opportunities, and I'm a certain amount of confidence that I have to have in myself. And I think that's one of the things that we have to make sure that we get to our children, is make sure that they have the confidence to um, build those structures that will propel us forward.
That's good. Brandon?
Yes, I would say I definitely agree with what Sam mentioned in terms of financial stability. I also, sort of building off of that, I also think that it's important, critically important, that they have a plan, and if not a plan, multiple plans, because a lot of times, as children, they have certain ideas of what they want to become and what they might, what they don't want to be. But it's critically important to have Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C. Uh, you know, ready to go. And sometimes children are not going to follow the same exact steps that their father or their mother or the previous generation did. And as long as they have a plan to support their ideas, we should respect that, right? Let them grow into that and let them learn from their own mistakes and also from their own successes. And we need to make sure that we congratulate them when they get those wins.
Cool. Chuck, what are your thoughts, man?
I would say it's kind of like Brandon mentioned earlier. I'm thinking it's more three-pronged, and I'm thinking awareness or intelligence, financial intelligence, educational intelligence, and historical intelligence. I think one of the biggest voids that we have with my generation and younger is knowing our history of who we are, and also whom we are, and grasping hold and really locking in and leaning into those different aspects of intelligence: financial, educational, and historical. So that's all.
Cool. I agree with all of that. Sam talked about financial stability. Brandon have a plan, multiple plans. Chuck talked about financial, educational, historical awareness. For me, I'll add, which is probably apropos since I'm a pastor, and the bishop and the panel, the leader of this panel today. I would say one of the things that we have to pass down to the next generation is a spiritual awareness. I think we are this generation is very spiritual, but that spirituality is not necessarily pointed anywhere. And I think that's dangerous, that we're so open to everything that we have no conviction about anything. And we have to be careful to not allow that to become what we perpetrate and perpetuate, I should say, into the next generation. I think that we have to have a concrete understanding of who we are spiritually, of who we serve. I think that plays a huge role in the dynamic of our culture. Who we are has always been attached to what we believe. And I think we have to make sure that we drive home a good understanding of our belief system. If you believe it, your kids should understand that. They should have a right, and I'll say this, they should have a right to learn and to grasp that belief system without it being forced on them. And I think teaching the next generation how to have a personal encounter with God is paramount, because understanding that particular facet of who you are actually gives substratum foundation to a whole lot of all of the other things that happen with regard to how we grow, how we become educated, who we interact with, and again, what we know we can have. And I talked about rights earlier, but there are spiritual rights that we also are able to tap into when we understand that. So I think that's what I'll add, the cherry on top of having a very good spiritual context for the next generation. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been great. Nice fluid conversation today. Sam Durfee, thank you. Pastor Chuck, thank you. And lastly, Brandon McLeod, thank you so much, man, for lending your ear, giving us normal people a little bit of credibility with your professorship and so forth and so on. So we thank you very much for that. Tab, thank you all for giving us the opportunity to share with you all, to give you insights, understanding on what it is, the plight of the Black man in America, how we're living, how our level of expectation, and what we're doing to help perpetuate a healthy next generation. So thank you all for joining in. Two things. One, if you're not saved, if you don't know the Lord and the pardon of your sins, if you've never come into real relationship with God, I would implore you, I beg you, I beseech you, as the Bible says in the King James Version, that you would engage God. He desires with you. And as our Heavenly Father, He wants to give, the Bible says He will give good gifts to His children. The best gift that we could ever receive would be that of the Holy Ghost. So I implore you that you would open up your heart and your mind to receive Jesus and to walk in great relationship with Him. Secondly, I'll ask quickly, you would sow into this ministry. I believe that what we're doing is important, that we're having an impact on the community as we grow, as our influence grows, as our ability to interact with the world grows. It takes resources to do that. We have been a blessing to our community, and we will continue to do so. But your sowing and your resources into this ministry makes what we do that much easier, and it allows us to stretch that much further to be a blessing to the world at large. So into this ministry, you'll see that pop up on your screen. Thank you all so much for joining us. The grace of God be on you, the joy of God be in you. Surely His victory has gone before you, and the peace of God be with you. In Jesus' name is our prayer. We'll see you soon. Take care.